batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
So welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. You're here with Jeremy and Jeff. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm here, and I'm excited to be here.
Ready for action.
Yes,
Great.
Thank you.
Good.
How are you?
I'm good. This is episode 10. I was just mentioning this is a little behind the scenes, but I'll share it with you all. Is we are approaching 5,000 listens on the podcast. So I'm pretty excited about that. This is our 10th episode, and we've only been doing it for about 2 months now. 2 months, 2.5 months, not for long.
If that.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's great. So thank you, those of you that are listening, and we appreciate that. Remember to follow us so you get updates on all the new ones. We're available on all the major platforms. And as we've mentioned, we do have an email address. It's classicguitarrock@mail.com. And of course, we have our Patreon site. You can be a patron, and our goal is to make $9 a month. So you can be a patron at $3 a month or $6 a month. The exciting thing about it, Jeff, is if they come in early, if they're one of our first patrons, we'll totally just let them come on the podcast. I mean, why not? Yeah. So
why not?
So let's just throw that out there. Our first patron, you get to be a guest on the podcast. So we can talk about whatever you want on the podcast. I think who wouldn't want to come on with us? Right?
I don't know who wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't know. So
anything classic rock, perhaps,
Yeah,
or music related, not anything.
So let me
I'll talk about your dog.
I do want to share this comment I had from a friend of mine that was listening, who took issue, and I think Jeff maybe takes issue, but he has never said it like my friend did. He says, man, some of that stuff you talk about, I don't think is classic rock. So I just want to throw this out there. I've kind of made this name up myself. That's why I call it the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. And I refer to it as Classic Guitar Rock. So yeah, there's stuff I talk about, Damn Yankees or something from the late 80s that a lot of classic rock purists would not consider classic rock. That's why I add that classic guitar rock to kind of differentiate it from. So it's a little broader approach than just classic rock. So I just want to throw that out there. And my friend was fine with it. He was just like, well, man, I can't even remember the band we were talking about. Oh, it was the episode last week when we had Greg Feller, who is a recording engineer from LA, on, and we were talking about Paul Gilbert and the guys in Sons of Apollo, and obviously it's a new album, and he was making the point that, well, that's not really classic rock. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's kind of in that vein. It's guitar driven. So yes, we have a little broader definition than just purely classic rock. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, it's okay to mix it up a little bit, right?
Sure.
Add a little spice.
Totally.
Why not?
Absolutely. So I think Jeff has some news items for us to kick things off.
This is kind of interesting in the world of online streaming and smart TVs. Everybody's streaming videos and documentaries. Mm-hmm. Something's coming on Amazon Prime from Yoko Ono and this other person, Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
Called the Coda Collection, and it's a music channel, and they're going to have concerts, documentaries, rare concerts and documentaries, some editorial content, 150 titles to start, $5 a month for Amazon Prime members.
Interesting.
And that's coming February 18th.
February 18th. And what's it called? Coda?
It's called the Coda Collection.
Interesting. Well, I'll check that out. This may be the first thing that people are excited about that Yoko Ono did. I don't know.
Yeah, I was almost afraid to mention.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
Well,
just
good for
kidding.
her. That's great. Well,
Yeah, isn't that cool? Because I'm into I love that. When I go on Netflix or Amazon Prime, if I don't find a documentary that's interesting, I'm always like, oh man.
That's exactly what I do. I go for the music documentaries, and actually Prime has quite a few. I've watched a few good ones on there. And even on YouTube, the problem with YouTube is sometimes the quality's not that great, right? But occasionally you'll stumble on something that's a pretty high quality for YouTube anyway. So that's great. Awesome.
Yeah, number 2, you would like this because this is one of your favorite bands. You might know this. Cheap Trick.
Oh, yes.
Announces their new album, the 20th studio album, In Another World.
I heard the single that dropped probably 5 days ago. And
Light Up the Fire.
Light Up the Fire. And it's pretty rocking. You know, it's,
what'd you think of it?
I kind of got to let it grow. I mean, I won't say that I love it yet, but it's solid. I mean, there's other stuff that I've heard over the last decade or so that I liked a little more, but I'm definitely going to check out the album. And let me just say this about Cheap Trick, by the way.
Classic rock?
It's well, again, really. You could do the whole, I think they are, right? But they had an album that came out, gosh, probably I can't, it's the Rockford album. It's called Rockford. Mm-hmm. And it is one of my favorite Cheap Trick albums. It's been like in my top 4 Cheap Trick albums. And this is an album that got 0 recognition, 0 airplay. You know, hardly anyone knows about it except diehard Cheap Trick fans. But it's one of those albums that you listen to it and it's like every single song sounds like a hit. And again, we've lamented about this. It's just kind of the nature of music now is there is tons of good music that gets released that no one ever hears. And so I've just decided right now, Jeff, part of our mission on this show will be to turn people on to that stuff. So
yes, we'll call it the B-sides or the deep cuts.
Totally.
There's
tracks. A lot of good stuff that's still coming out that you wouldn't know about.
One more album. Peter Frampton's releasing an all instrumental album.
Wow. I had
covers of cover songs. Cover songs like Sly and the Family Stone, If You Want Me to Stay, a David Bowie tune, George Harrison, Lenny Kravitz, Are You Gonna Go My Way?
Wow.
So really wide reaching.
Did you ever hear his cover of Black Hole Sun?
No, but a lot of people have covered that.
Phenomenal. It's instrumental. It's an instrumental.
Okay.
And it's really good. It's something people don't know about Frampton. Frampton and David Bowie were good friends. They grew up together. They're only a couple years apart. And Frampton's dad was David Bowie's teacher in art school. And so from the time Frampton was just a little 10 years old, he knew David Bowie. And so they were good friends a lot. That's cool. Frampton's one of those guys that's just, I won't say I'm a huge Frampton fan. Like I own all of his, I have Frampton Comes Alive. I mean, who doesn't? But I really like him. He's one of those guys. Anytime I see an interview with Peter Frampton, I stop and read it or watch it because he's just one of those solid guys that I just like.
You know, Rick Beato.
Yes.
On YouTube. Really awesome channel. He had a Frampton on, or I think he went to Frampton actually. Wherever he was and did an interview.
I saw him interview Eric Johnson here. And,
yes.
You know, when you have 3 million YouTube subscribers, you have the clout to.
He does now.
People like that. So at some point, maybe Jeff, we'll be able to have people like that on our podcast.
Wow. Yeah. That could
Until
be.
Then it's just you and me.
Maybe we'll create a poll in YouTube. Who would the listeners would like to have on first?
That's a great idea.
Which
great idea.
Musician, producer.
I love that idea. Let's do that. Okay.
And then we'll start working on that.
All right. So guys, we're going to begin I don't know if I want to call it a series, and I'm not going to commit to doing it every week, but I want to start drilling in to some classic albums. And I asked Jeff last week, I said, hey, what classic album would you like to dig into? And he recommended this album that we're going to do today. And I think it's timely because Leslie West passed away on the 23rd of December. So just over a month ago, we lost Leslie West at the age of 75. And Leslie West is, one of these names that we always hear. When you read the guitar magazines, when you read interviews, you always hear about him. And yet I find as I talk to people, not a lot of people really have listened to him all that much other than Mississippi Queen, right? We've all heard that. Mm-hmm. And so I thought this is a great choice because I had not listened to this whole album that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the first Mountain album, which is called Climbing. It came out in 1970. Mm-hmm. So we're going to listen to that. When we come back, we're going to dig in deep. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Leslie West and a Mountain, and then we're going to break it down kind of track by track for this album, Mountain Climbing from 1970. That's all when we get back here on the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. This is episode 10, and today we are focusing on a classic album from 1970 by the band Mountain, and it's called Climbing. So, Jeff, clear up some confusion for us right here at the beginning.
Yes. I also had not really listened to the whole album of Climbing, so this was a great exercise and a fun little thing to get into. Mm-hmm. But yes, Leslie West released a solo album in 1969 called Mountain.
Yes. So that's not the album we're talking about.
No. And obviously, he liked the name enough to, when they formed the band, to name the band Mountain in 1970. What a debut album.
Yes. So I think if you're going to talk about Mountain, you first have to talk about Cream. Yes. I think. And Mountain has kind of been called the American Cream, or a heavier version of Cream. So going back a ways, and Jeff, jump in because you might have to correct me here. But as Jeff mentioned, the first Leslie West album from 69 was called Mountain. It was Leslie West Mountain, which is a good album. To be honest, of the two, I prefer this one though. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to all of both of them, but I prefer Climbing. But on that album was bassist producer Felix Pappalardi. And Felix also was a producer of Cream. So he had this relationship with Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, very associated with Cream. He played with Leslie West on Leslie West's album, and then they had a different drummer. I don't remember who the drummer was on the first Leslie West album.
And he also produced Jack Bruce's
solo
album.
You're right. Now, here's what I'm not sure. When Mountain played at Woodstock,
1969,
they were calling themselves Mountain, right? But they didn't have this album out yet.
Right.
But it was called Mountain, not just Leslie West. So, okay. So they performed at Woodstock. They don't appear in the Woodstock movie, but they're in the Woodstock 2 movie. But that's Felix Pappalardi. I don't think Corky Lang was at Woodstock. I could be wrong. But anyway,
right on that one.
They played Woodstock. They went over really well. And then they decided, as Jeff said, Felix came on board then not just as a bass player and producer, but as a member of the band. They form a band now, Mountain, with Leslie West, Felix Pappalardi. They brought in a drummer named Corky Lang and recorded this album. It's a great album. What are your initial thoughts, Jeff? You just said you listened to it last night all the way through. What did you think?
I wasn't surprised about the heavy kind of riff based Clapton woman tone, heavy tones, heavy tunes. But I didn't realize that Felix was singing.
Right.
And his voice is totally different than Leslie West's. And his writing, is different. The songs I think he was more involved with have that more psychedelic-y, almost like spacey kind of thing going on back then.
And
So I found that it made a nice contrast to Leslie's style. So for an album, it was really up and down for me.
I agree. And you definitely hear in the vocals and in the bass playing, you hear Jack Bruce in Felix. You know, he's got a very dramatic delivery like Jack Bruce did his bass playing. He's a really good bass player. I mean, there's some tasty bass stuff going on, and the singing is, and like you said, there are a couple songs where they both sing. I think Silver Paper, they both sing and they trade off and on. And that's a nice contrast. Yeah, I really like that. I think that was great.
I'm going to start studying him and playing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he's pulling a lot from Clapton.
You hear Clapton, but you also, you mentioned Woman Tone. This is all over in this album. There's a lot of stuff where you tell he's backed off on the volume. Les Paul Jr. has a tone control, right?
Yes.
Must have a tone.
Just one tone control,
Yeah,
one volume.
Because there's a lot of that quiet woman tone. And that's what Clapton would call it, the woman tone. And that refers to, it's not this heavily driven tone. It's pulled back a little softer tone. It's all over in this album. Watching Leslie West play, and I've even heard him say in interviews, he only uses his index finger and his ring finger. And I don't know if he's exaggerating. I'm sure for chords and stuff, he's got to use his pinky. But when you watch him, sure enough, it's those two fingers. He moves all over the place.
Yeah.
But he is, and now that I've dug into it, and since you suggested this, like early in the week, this is all I've listened to. So I've listened to this a bunch. And I hear where other players have emulated this style. And there's a couple in particular. Michael Schenker cites Leslie West as an influence. Randy Rhoads actually cited Leslie West as an influence, which might seem kind of strange, but I totally hear Leslie West has this very wide vibrato, you know, where he's bending the note up and then still gets a lot of vibrato, a very strong vibrato. Yeah. And I hear that in Schenker's playing. I think that's something that he's probably borrowed from Leslie West. And obviously Clapton's a master, but what I appreciate about Leslie West is, even more so than Clapton, is melodies, right? His leads are all very melodic, and it's all basic minor and major pentatonic.
That's what I was going to say. He blends the major and minor pentatonics really well. And in a way you don't quite know, really. Right. You know, you're like, wait a second. And then when you try to figure it out on the guitar, if you're a guitar player, okay, that's a major pentatonic.
Yeah, exactly.
He's bending up to the major third, and then all of a sudden he'll pull off on the minor third.
Right. And you go, oh, wow.
Really tasty. And you're right. He's not blazing through runs. Clapton, I think, did that as well. But he also blazed through some things. But
he's got a very, when I hear him, you can tell he's just a powerful, he's a riff master, right? He's just got some great riffs. When you hear these, you know, and we'll get to these in more detail. Obviously you got Mississippi Queen, but Never in My Life, awesome. All these tunes that are just these heavy riffs. And this is 1970. I mean, this is a long time ago. Really good stuff.
Was Felix from New York, New Jersey? Because I wonder, like, imagine you're growing up in New Jersey, which I think Leslie West was born and grew up in New York a bit, somewhere on Long Island. And then, like, you know, maybe you get friends with somebody who happens to be a producer with Jack Bruce and Cream.
Exactly.
And then you're just, boop, you're in that world.
He did originate, at least, you know, musically, in the eclectic music scene of Greenwich Village. So he's from, at least from a music standpoint, he's also from New York. He attended the University of Michigan. He was born in the Bronx. So he was born in New York City. So Felix is a New York guy. Leslie played in a band called the Vagrants, and that's where Felix met him. And so they kind of had this relationship early on. And Felix, I think, was kind of their producer, promoter, whatever, from an early time. And now this is funny. There's a video of the Vagrants that you can find of them playing at it looks like they're playing at some teeny bopper birthday party from probably 1964, 65, something like this. And they're literally are dressed and look like the Beach Boys. You know, they've all got their nice shirts on, and there's this kind of chubby kid in the back, you know, oh, that must be Leslie West, who looks, he looks like Chris Farley. I mean, that's who he looks like in this video. You know, he's just up there kind of, you know, bebopping along. And then he steps down, plays this riffing little solo, and then just steps right back up on his little platform there next to the drummer. It's kind of humorous to see, because the Leslie West we all know and love, he's wearing the tassel-y clothes, hippie clothes. You know, he's got a scarf on, his hair's
crazy hair,
crazy. He's got sideburns. I mean, but it's funny to see him in that context looking like he's in the Beach Boys, but he could still play way back then.
Yeah, it's like when I remember seeing Jimmy Page in some pictures or videos.
Yeah.
Way back, you know?
That's funny.
When they were doing, what do they call it?
Skiffle.
Skiffle?
Yeah, he was in Skiffle then.
Shorter hair, just like young.
Yeah. And just in the case of Jimmy Page, some of this probably with Leslie, I imagine he probably played on some other people's stuff, but Jimmy Page was a session guy. So much of that British invasion stuff, Herman's Hermits, Jimmy Page is playing on a lot of that stuff, right? Because he was kind of a go-to. John Paul Jones, he and both of them played on a lot of that stuff. So if you go back and listen to a lot of that bubblegum music from the 60s, a lot of that's probably Page and John Paul Jones. It's just funny.
Yeah. I was surprised Mountain was so short-lived.
They didn't last long, did they?
No.
And they came from a time too where it was not uncommon for bands to put out 2 albums in a year, right? Mm-hmm. And at least you'd have an album every year. In that short period of time, they did come out with quite a few.
2 years, I think, right?
2 years. And how many albums did they come out in that 2-year period? Up through 74, they had Climbing, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, Flowers of Evil, and Avalanche are the 4 studio albums that I see. And then they've kind of gotten together again for kind of one-off stuff over the years. There was an album from 85.
Yeah.
Then one in 96, 2002, 2007. But you're right. It was a pretty short-lived time. And in that 3-year period, they came out, have like 4 albums, it looks like. Interesting. Now, one thing I thought was fascinating is when you listen to Leslie West and realize, okay, this is 1970, he has a really heavy tone. I mean, it's pretty heavy, distortion. I mean, it's a heavy tone.
Oh, absolutely.
And I saw an interview and then I read about it also, that much of that tone is a result of the amp he was using, which was not a guitar amp. Did you see any of that? Hear any of that?
I heard he was using Sun, 2 N's.
He used a Sun Coliseum PA head.
Yeah.
And some of you guitar players, you know, might be aware of this process. Jeff, I'm sure you are. On a lot of the old Fenders, for instance, you could daisy chain, right? You'd run out, you'd have 2 inputs on a Fender Twin or a Deluxe Reverb, and you could run into one and then you daisy chain it into the other channel.
Yep.
And that basically gave you like a gain stage, because you could crank up the volume on one channel and you're hearing that go through the other channel. It's kind of worked like a master volume, and you could get some dirt that way. So by accident, okay, the wrong thing was shipped to Leslie. Oh. And the way he tells it is, you know, I wanted a Sun amp. So his agent or whoever ordered this Sun amp and they ship it to him, and it's a PA head. And he plugged into that and he was daisy chaining the channels, and he got this massive sound that became kind of the Leslie West sound. So that was kind of funny. But it's a very thick, rocking, distorted sound that's kind of ahead of its time. You know,
I mean, there was a lot of heavy riffing going on, right?
Yeah.
68, 69, 70.
There was. He was
Sabbath and Purple.
Yeah. He was kind of at the forefront of, yeah, you're right. I mean, he wasn't the only one, because we had Sabbath, we had Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Page was doing stuff too, but he was definitely the vanguard too, along with those guys at the forefront.
The American version.
That's right.
American heavy.
And then really, you get Ronnie Montrose a few years later, but Leslie West and Ronnie Montrose, to me, they're the American guys that were really, I mean, if you want to call them proto metal, early metal, that were really pioneering a lot of this stuff in terms of a lot of drive, feedback, all of this stuff. It was great. Here's one thing that jumped out at me from a general production standpoint of climbing, which I appreciated. If you go back and listen to Hendrix, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, when stereo was still kind of new, they thought stereo was really cool. And so you'd hear a lot of this hard panning. The Beatles, especially, Ringo's completely on one side. And then you got the bass and a guitar on the other side. And from one standpoint, it's kind of cool to hear that separation, but it drives me crazy to listen to it. I want to hear drums throughout the mix. I don't want the drums all on the right side. I don't want the drums all on the left. I want it everywhere, right? And so one of the things I appreciate about this album is they're not playing with the stereo as much as a lot of the albums of this time. Like a Hendrix album, same thing. Everything's panned so hard, right or left. I don't like it. I guess if you're sitting in a room listening to it, it's kind of okay. But if you're listening on headphones or in your car, it kind of drives me crazy. So I appreciate the fact that this album, obviously it's in stereo, but they have, you got drums on both sides, you got guitars, you hear a little separation, but not radically so like so many of those 60s albums. I'm going
to have to go back and critique Ringo or critique the mix. Yeah. I mean, that's surprising to me. I mean, other things, cymbals, but drums,
you'll hear I'm thinking of a good example,
especially the kick. That's got to be down the middle.
If you listen to Ticket to Ride or something, you kind of hear it's very much to one side. Even Eddie Van Halen, he'd have all his guitar on one side and all of his reverb on the other. Yeah, kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I like stereo, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times, at least in the 60s, Hendrix, you hear a lot of this. There's so much panning, it's almost a distraction to me anyways. That's just my opinion. But I like the fact that I can listen to this album and I hear everything. It's down the middle. You hear some separation of things, but the bass drum's right in the middle. The drums are in, so I like that.
Indeed.
All right. So anything else before we start jumping into this track by track? Because I want to kind of talk about some of these tracks in detail, if you're okay.
No, let's do it.
Okay. So album has 8 tracks. Is that right? I think it's got 8 tracks.
10
tracks.
Well,
shows you how much I know.
Maybe the 9 with the live.
Yeah, there's the one live. If you listen to the newer versions. Okay, so Jeff is right. There's 10 tracks total on the newer. If you stream it or buy the CD, you get that bonus for Yasgur's Farm, a live version. But the original album was 9 tracks. It kicks off. This is the one that we all know. Kicks off with Mississippi Queen. So Jeff, your thoughts on Mississippi Queen?
The band that I was playing more with before COVID, we would play this. We play this song, so I am a huge fan. Again, it's the riff, it's the tone, it's the sound, it's the voice.
And we haven't talked about his
voice. Oh my God,
great voice,
amazing,
great voice. And this is just a heavy riff. I mean, it's one of the biggest cowbell songs. I mean, we all think of Reaper, right? But really,
I think of Will Ferrell. Actually.
Oh, this one is a massive cowbell song, and just rips and rocks. And as you mentioned, going back and forth between the major and minor pentatonic throughout this song.
Absolutely,
and very tasty. And you can sing back a Leslie West solo, which you can't say that about a lot of pentatonic blues-based solos, but you can do that with his. Very melodic. He
leaves space,
Totally.
He'll play a riff and there's some space, like you said, with the vibrato, and then boom into the next one. And it's like that's just a sign of a great player.
Yeah, tasty, very.
So I read somewhere the cowbell. I guess they were recording over and over and over and over, and he was getting tired, so he just started hitting the cowbell as a count in instead of probably his sticks or saying 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And Felix liked it so much they left it in.
Leave it in. It works. Yeah, it's
it's history.
It's phenomenal. There's an old episode. So here's your homework, everyone listening. There's an episode from the Dennis Miller Show where plays. Have you seen that live cut? And I think there's some alcoholism or something going on. It's kind of crazy.
I remember a drumstick being thrown.
Yeah, at one point, Corky Lang just whips a drumstick right at Leslie, and Leslie turns around and looks at him. You're like, "Oh, that was kind of wild." But you got to watch it. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy performance, and one of those things that it's kind of like watching an Andy Kaufman bit where you're not sure, am I supposed to be laughing at this, or is this something going wrong here? That's what that gig reminds me of when they play on Dennis Miller. But you should watch it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they're playing Mississippi Queen. But this is a rockin', ripping tune. It's a classic. Great song.
And it's obviously your typical 1-4-5 for you guitar players out there, bass players. Yeah. But it's because of the riff and the way he's playing it, it's way more interesting than your basic I don't know.
Absolutely.
Not as easy I guess, as you would think, especially if you're trying to sing it.
Oh, for sure. Do you sing, Jeff?
I sing a little.
Okay.
Yeah. You?
But well, a little kind of. I mean, I try not to sing lead, but this would be a hard song to sing.
Oh, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, but it's a great song, and you understand why it's a classic, because it's a classic. So
did you make any connection with Mississippi Queen and a song off of Leslie's solo album? Maybe it was Blood of the Sun. One of them you kind of got a hint of. Oh,
and you're like, yeah, it probably is Blood of the Sun, because Blood of the Sun is a major riffage too. Yeah, it's good. I mean, you hear it. That's kind of a blueprint. Yeah, it's really good. The production on this album is better than on the Leslie West solo album. I think this album sounds better. One of the things I noticed listening to the first Leslie West album, which is called Mountain, again, which makes it confusing, is the guitar in comparison to the vocals is really low. Kind of drove me crazy that, and with the way Leslie sings, where he's yelling, screaming, you got to have the guitars way up there with it too. Otherwise it's his vocals are a little overpowering, but anyways, just a little aside. Mississippi Queen, awesome song. Now, cut 2. This is one that gets a lot of press. I know that Michael Schenker has covered this song. This is one he's talked about as being a very influential song. It's called Theme, and people often call it Theme from an Imaginary Western. It's actually Theme for an Imaginary Western, written by Jack Bruce and sung like Jack Bruce by Felix Pappalardi. When I hear this song, Jeff, you know what song I think of? A Whiter Shade of Pale.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
I think
because it's got that bass walk down thing. It's got the organ, and it's just kind of a similar chord progression. And when I hear this, I'm like, because I think Whiter Shade of Pale, I didn't look this up, so I may be wrong, but I think Whiter Shade of Pale came out like 2 years before this. You can check me on this, Jeff. I'm thinking it was like 67, 68 when Whiter Shade of Pale came out. And there's a guy in Procol Harum named Robin Trower, who's no slouch on the guitar either. And they could have made a Whiter Shade of Pale, of a ripping song like this one, but they didn't. There's no guitar solo in that song, which is a shame. But that's what I think of that song when I hear this, because you got the organ, kind of the same vibe, same type of delivery. But then, oh, by the way, we're just going to have a ripping guitar solo all the way through this thing. I love this song. I just think it's a phenomenal song. It's kind of a mid to slow tempo, and then it just rips. It's just a great guitar solo all the way through. It's tasty. This might be my favorite song on the album. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Whiter Shade of Pale released in 1967.
67. Okay.
May of 67.
Yeah. And
went to number 1 on the UK singles chart.
And a great tune, by the way, a great cover by HSAS in the 80s. They do a version, that's Sammy Hagar and Neil Sean. They did a version of Whiter Shade of Pale, which is kind of a ripping version. But I often wonder, had they let Robin Trower cut loose a little more on a Whiter Shade of Pale, it might be considered a guitar masterpiece, because Robin Trower can definitely do it, So typical slow chord progression, it's telling a story, as you can imagine, talking about people traveling across the plains and all of this stuff. And then just a ripping guitar solo. It's great. Any thoughts for you on this tune that jumped out?
No, just like I said, I was pleasantly surprised with these different, to me, just like very contrast to the hard, heavy riff and blues. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
And a very, very much a vocal contrast when you get to Felix singing versus Leslie singing. Yeah, it's great. And then number 3, maybe the heaviest song on the album to me, Never in My Life. Again, loud, bombastic. Here's one thing that kind of jumps out at me, and I think this is a product of the time, right? This is 1970, so they produce things differently now. There are places throughout this album where I'm like, man, I wish they'd turn up his guitar a little bit, because you'll hear him. It wasn't on this song so much as some of the other songs we'll get to later, but you hear him, there's the rhythm part he's playing, and you'll hear some licks going on in the background, but they're a little quieter. I wish they'd bring those up in the mix a little more so I could hear those a little better, what he's doing.
We might have to play this one. This might be our number 2. Mountain.
There you go. It's a great one. So what did you think about the 4th track, Silver Paper?
I like the lyric, open up your heart and let the sun shine in.
Yeah, this is a hippie song, right?
Kind of like, positive.
Yeah, it's very
happy.
positive. And this is the one, open your heart, let the sun shine in, very late 60s, early 70s message, Yeah. So a little dated from that standpoint, but this is one where they're trading back and forth on the vocals, right? And it works. And it's an upbeat, positive song. But again, he manages to sneak in some very heavy guitar histrionics. I love it. I love this song. In fact, the first side 1 is definitely my favorite side of the album.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Good song. But yeah, this one, I think more than any, if you're going to say sounds like a 1970 song, this is it, because it's kind of a flower children, open your heart, let the sun shine in and all of that. Great message. And it's interesting that you got this great positive upbeat song, but great guitar riffs throughout. It's good stuff. And then
Yazgur's
Farm,
which obviously was written for Mr. Yazgur.
For Mr. Yazgur. Tell us about Mr. Yazgur. Give us the context there.
Well, I think it's well known. He owned this piece of property, this farm.
And a little thing happened there.
And I remember hearing that they expected, 30 to 50,000 people over the 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't happen.
What was the final count at Woodstock, by the way? Do we know? Wasn't it like around 500,000?
Yeah, 500,000.
Ridiculous. Yes.
Which, in contrast, the more not positive Altamont right. Speedway, that was, I think, also up in the 500,000s.
Yeah.
But we all know what happened there. But.
Yeah. And think about this. We all take it for granted now that massive, big festival type, we've had the US Festival, we've had Live Aid. There have been several concerts where you have hundreds of thousands of people since then, but this was the beginning of that. They had to invent sound systems that could do this, back in the late 60s, early 70s. So this was all kind of new,
Yeah, let alone the infrastructure that they weren't prepared for, right? Water and toilets. That's why Woodstock was such a. But it's amazing that many people could get together, and they did make a conscious decision
to go. We're all going to go
to get along and just make the best. And it's just, I can't imagine that happening now. But never say never.
So it's great. So the song is for Yazgur's Farm. So it's about Woodstock. You know what I think of when I hear this song? I think of Something by the Beatles. Just kind of the vibe, Again, and you're seeing the formula here. all the songs have great guitar playing in them, right? They all Leslie opens up and plays great on this song, and this is a great song. On the CD and on the later releases, there's a live version of this at the end, so you get this song twice.
Heavy organ in this one, huh?
Heavy organ, a lot of organ in this one. Did I misread this? I thought that I saw that they actually performed this at Woodstock, which means they wrote it to perform it at Woodstock. Unless I saw that wrong. I thought I saw that somewhere. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. Let me know.
I think I might have read that was true, but the name was something else, like Who I Am, but you and the Sun or something.
That's what it was. They wrote this song and then they renamed it after. That's what it was after Woodstock. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and then the next song, and I don't. It's not a bad song, but to me, track 2 on side 2 is called "To My Friend," which is just a guitar instrumental. Nothing wrong with it. To me, it's kind of filler. Here's what jumped out at me. This sounds like
Beatles.
Kind of.
You know what? Of the sitar.
Well, the sitar's in the following one, in the Laird, isn't it? Is the sitar? And I thought "To My Friend," which is a 12-string guitar. I could be wrong.
I think there's a sitar in there.
Could be. But you know what I heard on track 2, "To My Friend"? I said, this sounds like something off Led Zeppelin 3.
I had that in my notes too.
Yeah. This could be from Led Zeppelin 3. However, this was released in March of 1970. Led Zeppelin 3 was released in October of 1970. So this came first, but this totally sounds like it belongs on Led Zeppelin 3.
I have that in my notes. Yeah. You know what else I have? Kind of reminds me of a Stephen Stills kind of style,
especially the really upbeat part. Totally. I could totally see that. Yeah, totally see that.
Yeah, I liked it.
It's a nice little break. I think what's kind of quirky to me is how it jumps back and forth from the slow mellow part with the harmonics. Then it's just he's strumming really fast and then it switches back. So it's a little disjointed to me, but obviously the guy can play. I mean, it's impressive that his acoustic chops are there also. So it's
totally
pretty cool. And then that leads us into the next cut, which is called the Laird. I meant to look this up. I don't know what a Laird is. What is a Laird? Do we know what that is? I don't know. But it's again, starts mellow, got some sitar in it. So again, appropriate for the time. A lot of sitar going on in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's mellow and transitions. There's again some great guitar playing in this too, but just a mellow.
Yeah, exotic, kind of like little spacey.
Word, spacey, kind of totally.
A laird, a person who owns a large estate.
There you go. Okay.
That sound right?
Okay, that makes sense. It's some European fiefdom type vibe going on. Okay.
I read a comment about this song. Who knows if this is true, but it's so specific. It might be. Someone commented that the song was played on a 1927 Larson Brothers Stahl big boy guitar that Jimi Hendrix owned. Jimmy gave the guitar to Eric Clapton in '69. Clapton left the guitar at Felix's home, and Felix used it on the Laird.
That's cool.
So he does play guitar on this as well.
Yeah, Felix plays guitar in a couple tracks, I noticed. Yeah. Felix, I think, is a pretty all around musician from what I'm seeing. So.
Yeah.
But it's a cool song, and again has that kind of trippy, kind of hippie feel, a psychedelic feel. But it's a great song. And then, did you have anything else from this track before I move on, Jeff?
I was just listening to it again and paying attention to the stereo effect.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of wide things happen in the mix. Yeah, I like it though.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Then track 4, we're back to the rockers, right? This one's called "Sitting on a Rainbow," and if I remember right, it's got a pretty good riff on it too. Leslie West knew how to write riffs. I haven't sat down to learn them all, but to me, not sitting down to learn them all, they sound like they're all in A or E. Am I right?
Exactly.
So
there's so many songs in any.
yeah, and
of course,
and there's a reason, right? Guitar
Yeah,
players love those keys because for a couple reasons, but I'm guessing this is probably a song in A or E, but it's got a good riff on it, and again, just a good rocking tune.
I think there's a cowbell part of the opening drum.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think there's cowbell in this song. Sitting on a Rainbow, subject matter wise, it's very 60s, 70s theme.
Felix's bass on this is really Jack Bruce-ish.
Absolutely. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. A lot of and pauses and all kinds of a lot of movement. Totally.
Yeah, there's no like dum 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 dum.
Oh no.
Dum, dum, dum,
No,
dum,
no.
dum.
He's
everywhere.
Very melodic, a lot of movement, a lot of pauses, a lot of very good bass player. And I'm pretty sure he played with the pick. And all the pictures I've seen, he's playing like the violin bass, the Beatle bass, like McCartney played.
The Hofner. Is that what that is?
Hofner, yeah, and I'm sure he played other types of basses too, but I've seen lots of pictures where he's playing one of those. Now, the final song, studio song on the original album is called "Boys in the Band." Now, follow me on this. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me here, but this starts with a nice, beautiful piano part, and then a guitar part. Now, if I tell you this reminds me of a UFO song, I don't want you to laugh at me, but hear me out on this. This whole, and there might have been other examples, but I'm trying to think from this era, and I haven't been able to find one, but this whole mellow, dramatic piano part with a guitar solo on top of it, that model, that blueprint is something that UFO later used to great effect. I mean, I could give you a handful of UFO songs that has these great dramatic, almost, orchestral type keyboard parts with an epic guitar solo against it. And this album, way back in 1970, kind of has that feel to me. And if you listen to a UFO track later, like Love to Love, perfect example of this blending of a mellow, beautiful piano part with a ripping melodic guitar part. It's a great formula. And here it is right here. And I can't say for certain, but when I hear that, I think, oh, well, there's some inspiration for Michael Schenker right there.
It feels like an end to an album. Like it's telling the end of the story.
It does. And this song really reminds me, when you get into the chorus where it's kind of like a key change, that to me sounds very Creamish. That sounds very much like a Cream thing going on there. Cream was very influential to Leslie West, obviously, and to Felix. So yeah, it's only natural that we hear that Cream influence there, and it was great. I mean, I love it. This is a solid song, and I think you're right. It sounds like the last song on an album.
I had for notes somewhere that this was an example of sort of that Clapton-esque woman tone. You roll the tone back on that bridge pickup. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. It's beautiful sound.
Yeah, and very, very melodic, very musical, very tasteful playing. And that's the thing about Leslie West, is he's not the fastest, he's not the flashiest, but everything he plays is tasty. It sounds good. He's got that. I love his vibrato. It's just a very wide melodic vibrato. He probably has very strong hands, can just tug those strings all over the place. And he plays those little Les Paul Juniors and stuff. And he also played
a flying V.
And a flying V. I saw a video. I've been trying to find it, but in the mid 70s, the Leslie West Band, and I saw a clip from like Midnight Special or Kirshner's Rock Concert or one of those shows. And the Leslie West Band featured a guitar player named Mick Jones, who later would form Foreigner, but he was in the Leslie West Band. So there's a video of him and Leslie West in the same band, and it's just kind of cool to see that.
That is very cool.
Two great guitar players, in one band. Pretty awesome. So Your final thoughts on Climbing by Mountain, Jeff. What do you think? Would you recommend it to others?
One of the top for a guitar player for sure.
Yeah.
And for songwriters, one of the top 10 to maybe top 20.
It's a great
for sure to come out during that time frame.
Yeah.
And a good study. If you're a guitar player, I think personally, I have a hard time with like rushing playing, getting kind of excited.
Right.
And I think if you sort of study Leslie and try to copy some of the things he's doing, it's a good learning thing to do.
Kind of a less is more. Leslie is more. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like you, we have heard about Leslie West for years. All of us that have been in guitar and to classic rock, you always hear about Leslie West. And I'll be honest, I always liked Mississippi Queen, and I've always said, yeah, great, Leslie West, whatever. But I never took the time to really dig into it. And sadly, a lot of times we don't until someone's no longer with us, right? So going back and actually listening to this as a homework assignment, it was great. It was great. I'm sure there'll be albums that you and I recommend that we go through, and I'm sure there'll be albums that either one of us will feel like it's a chore to listen to. You're like, oh man, Jeff wants me to listen to this album, so I will. But man, I'm not really digging it, right? This was not one of those. I really enjoyed this album. And this is one that I will continue to listen to. There's not a bad track on it. Occasionally you'll get one of those albums where I just can't, this album's okay, but I cannot sit through this song. There's no songs like that on this album. I mean,
it's fantastic.
It's a good album. And sometimes some of the 60s stuff just doesn't grab me. Like, I go back and try and listen to the Yardbirds, and I understand the importance of the Yardbirds, or even the Beano album. And I understand their importance, but it's
hold on now.
I know.
Hold on a second.
Ground here, but and a lot of it might be more a product of the production than anything else. But it's harder for me to get through some of those. This one, even though it's from 1970, sounds, for lack of a better word, new enough, modern enough to me that I don't struggle getting through it. Part of it is that they don't have the crazy wide stereo separation that they have on some of those that drive me crazy, but it's a great album. It's a solid album. If you're a guitar player, I think it's required listening. You got to go check out Leslie West, and you appreciate what he brought, and you see how he influenced other people. So it's a great album.
Big album for a big man.
For sure. That's right. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. This is a lot of fun. And next week, let's go ahead and let them know what our album is for next week, Jeff.
Indeed. Next week, we've got a great album from UFO called Phenomenon.
It's a great album. The first one with Michael Schenker. I'm looking forward to it. So
another album that surprised me.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
And a lot different than some of their later stuff. But anyways, we'll save that for next week. So Jeff, thanks so much. Thank you all for listening. Again, you can support us on Patreon. You can email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. Check out the YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing you next week on the Classic Guitar Rock podcast. See you, Jeff.
See you, Jeremy. Thanks. Adios.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock podcast.